Okay, back in battle. So they're still fighting. I was reading, after I was reading it, it even said that it was not the end of the Civil War. So Lee's surrender was not the end of this. So we're still in battle, still going through all this. Same as always. We got some answers. Go back and read that, listen to that. We definitely got some answers there. Nothing too detailed. Again, it's just standard. We're doing duty right now. Make sure I don't leave anything out. A lot of losses, I hear. What's all this losing? Yeah, they're not getting much of a response out there, are they? But we'll continue this. I don't know what they think they're doing with all this brightness and bullshit. Yeah, there he goes, all creeping in. Let me push him out.
Whence it proceeded west to McKinville, Murfreesboro, and Franklin, and was finally driven south of the Tennessee. The damage done by this raid was repaired in a few days. During the partial invasion of Atlanta, General Rousseau joined General Sherman with a force of cavalry from Decatur, having made a successful raid upon the Atlanta and Montgomery Railroad and its branches near Opelika. Cavalry raids were also made by Generals McCook, Garrard, and Stoneman to cut the remaining railroad communication with Atlanta. The first two were successful, the latter disastrous. General Sherman's movement from Chattanooga to Atlanta was prompt, skillful, and brilliant. The history of his flank movements and battles during that memorable campaign will ever be read with an interest unsurpassed by anything in history. His own report and those of his subordinate commanders accompanying it give the details of that most successful campaign. He was dependent for the supply of his armies upon a single track railroad from Nashville to the point where he was operating. This passed the entire distance through a hostile country, and every foot of it had to be protected by troops. The cavalry force of the enemy under Forrest in northern Mississippi was evidently waiting for Sherman to advance far enough into the mountains of Georgia to make a retreat disastrous, to get upon this line and destroy it beyond the possibility of further use. To guard against this danger, Sherman left what he supposed to be a sufficient force to operate against Forrest in West Tennessee. He directed General Washburn, commanded there, to send Brigadier General S.D. Sturgis in command of this force to attack him. On the morning of the 10th of June, General Sturgis met the enemy near Guntown, Mississippi, was badly beaten and driven back in utter rout and confusion to Memphis, a distance of about 100 miles, hotly pursued by the enemy. By this, however, the enemy was defeated in his designs upon Sherman's line of communications. The persistency with which he followed up his success exhausted him and made a season for rest and repairs necessary. In the meantime, Major General A.J. Smith, with the troops of the Army of the Tennessee that had been sent by General Sherman to General Banks, arrived at Memphis on their return from Red River, where they had done most excellent service. He was directed by General Sherman to immediately take the offensive against Forrest, this with the promptness and effect which has characterized his whole military career. On the 14th of July, he met the enemy at Tupelo, Mississippi, and whipped him badly. The fighting continued through 3 days. Our loss was small compared with that of the enemy. Having accomplished the expedition, General Smith returned to Memphis. During the months of March and April, this same force under Forrest annoyed us considerably. On the 24th of March, it captured Union City, Kentucky, and its garrison, and on the 24th attacked Paducah, commanded by Colonel S.G. Hicks, 40th Illinois Volunteers. Colonel Hicks, having but a small force, withdrew to the forts near the river, from where he repulsed the enemy and drove him from the place. On the 13th of April, part of this force, under the rebel General Buford, summoned the garrison of Columbus, Kentucky, to surrender, but received for reply from Colonel Lawrence, 34th New Jersey Volunteers, that, being placed there by his government with adequate force to hold his post and repel all enemies from it, surrender was out of the question. On the morning of the same day, Forrest attacked Fort Pillow, Tennessee, garrisoned by a detachment of Tennessee cavalry and the 1st Regiment Alabama Colored Troops, commanded by Major Booth. The garrison fought bravely until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the enemy carried the works by assault, and, after our men threw down their arms, proceeded in an inhuman and merciless massacre of the garrison. On the 14th, General Buford, having failed at Columbus, appeared before Paducah, but was again driven off. Guerrillas and raiders, seemingly emboldened by Forrest's operations, were also very active in Kentucky. The most noted of these was Morgan, with a from 2,000 to 3,000 cavalry. He entered the state through Pound Gap in the latter part of May. On the 11th of June, they attacked and captured Cynthinia with its entire garrison. On the 12th, he was overtaken by General Burbridge and completely routed with heavy loss, and was finally driven out of the state. This notorious guerrilla was afterwards surprised and killed near Greenville, Tennessee, and his command captured and dispersed by General Gillem. In the absence of official reports of the commencement of the Red River expedition, except so far as relates to the movements of the troops sent by General Sherman under General A.J. Smith, I am unable to give the date of its starting. The troops under General Smith, comprising 2 divisions of the 16th and a detachment of the 17th Army Corps, left Pittsburgh on the 10th of March and reached the designated point on Red River 1 day earlier than that appointed by General Banks. The rebel forces at Fort De Russy, thinking to defeat him, left the fort on the 14th to give him battle in the open field. But, while occupying the enemy with skirmishing and demonstrations, Smith pushed forward to Fort De Russy, which had been left with a weak garrison, and captured it with its garrison, about 350 men, 11 pieces of artillery, and many small arms. Our loss was but slight. On the 15th, he pushed forward to Alexandria, which place he reached on the 18th. On the 21st, he had an engagement with the enemy at Hill, in which he defeated him, capturing 210 prisoners and 4 pieces of artillery. On the 28th, he again attacked and defeated the enemy under the rebel General Taylor at Cane River. By the 26th, General Banks had assembled his whole army at Alexandria and pushed forward to Grand Ecore. On the morning of April 6th, he moved from Grande Corps. On the afternoon of the 7th, he advanced and met the enemy near Pleasant Hill and drove him from the field. On the same afternoon, the enemy made a stand 8 miles beyond the Pleasant Hill, but was again compelled to retreat. On the 8th, at Sabine Crossroads and Peach Hill, the enemy attacked and defeated his advance, capturing 19 pieces of artillery and an immense amount of transportation and stores. During the night, General Banks fell back to Pleasant Hill, where another battle was fought on the 9th, and the enemy repulsed with great loss. During the night, General Banks continued his retrograde movement to Grande Corps and thence to Alexandria, which he reached on the 27th of April. Serious difficulty arose in getting Admiral Porter's fleet, which accompanied the expedition, over the rapids, the water having fallen so much since they passed up as to prevent their return. At the suggestion of Colonel, now Brigadier General Bailey, and under his superintendence, wing dams were constructed by which the channel was contracted so that the fleet passed down the rapids in safety. The Army evacuated Alexandria on the 14th of May after considerable skirmishing with the enemy's advance and reached Morganzia and Point Coupé near the end of the month. The disastrous termination of this expedition and the lateness of the season rendered impracticable the carrying out of my plans of a movement in force sufficient to ensure capture of Mobile. On the 23rd of March, Major General Steele left Little Rock with the 7th Army Corps to cooperate with General Banks's expedition on the Red River and reached Arkadelphia on the 28th. On the 16th of April, after driving the enemy before him, he was joined near Elkins Ferry in Washita County by General Thayer, who had marched from Fort Smith after several severe skirmishes in which the enemy was. General Steele reached Camden, which he occupied about the middle of April. On learning the defeat and consequent retreat of General Banks on Red River and the loss of one of his own trains at Marks's Mill in Dallas County, General Steele determined to fall back to the Arkansas River. He left Camden on the 26th of April and reached Little Rock on the 2nd of May. On the 30th of April, the enemy attacked him while crossing Saline River at Jenkins's Ferry, but was repulsed with considerable loss. Our loss was about 600 in killed, wounded, and prisoners. Major General Canby, who had been assigned to the command of the Division of the West Mississippi, was therefore directed to send the 19th Army Corps to join the armies operating against Richmond and to limit the remainder of his command to such operations might be necessary to hold the positions and lines of communications he then occupied. Before starting General A.J. Smith's troops back to Sherman, General Canby sent a part of it to disperse a force of the enemy that was collecting near the Mississippi River. General Smith met and defeated this force near Lake Chico on the 5th of June. Our loss was about 40 killed and 70 wounded. In the latter part of July, General Canby sent Major General Gordon Granger with such forces as he could collect to cooperate with Admiral Farragut against the defenses of Mobile Bay. On the 8th of August, Fort Gaines surrendered to the combined naval and land forces. Fort Powell was blown up and abandoned. On the 9th, Fort Morgan was invested and after a severe bombardment, surrendered on the 23rd. The total captures amounted to 1,464 prisoners and 104 pieces of artillery. About the last of August, it being reported that the rebel General Price, with a force of about 10,000 men, had reached Jacksonport on his way to invade Missouri. General A.J. Smith's command, then en route from Memphis to join Sherman, was ordered to Missouri. A cavalry force was also at the same time sent from Memphis under command of Colonel Winslow. This made General Rosecrans's forces superior to those of Price, and no doubt was entertained he would be able to check Price and drive him back, while the forces under General Steele in Arkansas would cut off his retreat. On the 26th day of September, Price attacked Pilot Knob and forced the garrison to retreat, and thence moved north to the Missouri River and continued up that river towards Kansas. General Curtis, commanding Department of Kansas, immediately collected such forces as he could to repel the invasion of Kansas, while General Rosecrans's cavalry was operating in his rear. The enemy was brought to battle on the Big Blue and defeated, with the loss of nearly all his artillery and trains and a large number of prisoners. He made a precipitate retreat to northern Arkansas. The impunity with which Price was enabled to roam over the state of Missouri for a long time, and the incalculable mischief done by him show to how little purpose a superior force may be used. There is no reason why General Rosecrans should not have concentrated his forces and beaten and driven Price before the latter reached Pilot Knob. September 20th, the enemy's cavalry under Forrest crossed the Tennessee near Waterloo, Alabama, and on the 23rd attacked the garrison at Athens, consisting of 600 men, which capitulated on the 24th. Soon after the surrender, 2 regiments of reinforcements arrived, and after a severe fight were compelled to surrender. Forrest destroyed the railroad westward, captured the garrison at Sulphur Branch Trestle, skirmished with the garrison at Pulaski on the 27th, and on the same day cut the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad near Tullahoma and Acard. On the morning of the 30th, one column of Forrest's command under Buford appeared before Huntsville and summoned the surrender of the garrison. Receiving an answer in the negative, he remained in the vicinity of the place until next morning, when he again summoned its surrender and received the same reply as on the night before. He withdrew in the direction of Athens, which place had been re-garrisoned, and attacked it on the afternoon of the 1st of October, but without success. On the morning of the 2nd, he renewed his attack, but was handsomely repulsed. Another column under Forrest appeared before Columbia on the morning of the 1st, but did not make an attack. On the morning of the 3rd, he moved towards Mount Pleasant. While these operations were going on, every exertion was made by General Thomas to destroy the forces under Forrest before he could recross the Tennessee, but was unable to prevent his escape to Corinth, Mississippi. In September, an expedition under General Burbridge was sent to destroy the salt works at Saltville, Virginia. He met the enemy on the 2nd of October, about 3.5 miles from Saltville, and drove him into his strongly entrenched around the salt, from which he was unable to dislodge him. During the night, he withdrew his command and returned to Kentucky. General Sherman, immediately after the fall of Atlanta, put his armies in camp in and about the place and made all preparations for refitting and supplying them for future service. The great length of road from Atlanta to the Cumberland River, however, which had to be guarded, allowed the troops but little rest. During this time, Jefferson Davis made a speech in Macon, Georgia, which was reported in the papers of the South and soon became known to the whole country, disclosing the plans of the enemy, thus enabling General Sherman to fully meet them. He exhibited the weakness of supposing that an army that had been beaten and fearfully decimated in a vain attempt at the defensive could successfully undertake the offensive against the army that had so often defeated it. In execution of this plan, Hood, with his army, was soon reported to the southwest of Atlanta, moving far to Sherman's right. He succeeded in reaching the railroad about Big Shanty and moved north on it. General Sherman, leaving a force to hold Atlanta, with the remainder of his army, fell upon him and drove him to Gadsden, Alabama. Seeing the constant annoyance he would have with the roads to his rear if he attempted to hold Atlanta, General Sherman proposed the abandonment and destruction of that place with all the railroads leading to it, and telegraphed me as follows: Centerville, Georgia, October 10, noon. Dispatch about Wilson just received. Hood is now crossing Coosa River, 12 miles below Rome, bound west. If he passes over the Mobile and Ohio road, had I not better execute the plan of my letter sent by Colonel Porter and leave General Thomas with the troops now in Tennessee to defend the state? He will have an ample force when the reinforcements ordered reach Nashville. W.T. Sherman, Major General, Lieutenant General Grant. For a full understanding of the plan referred to in this dispatch, I quote from the letter sent by Colonel Porter. I will therefore give my opinion that your army and Canby's should be reinforced to the maximum, that after you get Wilmington, you strike for Savannah and the river, that Canby be instructed to hold the Mississippi River and send a force to get Columbus, Georgia, either by the way of the Alabama or the Apalachicola, and that I keep Hood employed and put my army in final order for Augusta, Columbia, and Charleston, to be ready as soon as Wilmington is sealed as to commerce and the city of Savannah is in our possession. This was in reply to a letter of mine of date September 12th, in answer to a dispatch of his containing substantially the same proposition, and in which I informed him of a proposed movement against Wilmington and of the situation in Virginia, etc. City Point, Virginia, October 11, 1864, 11 a.m. Your dispatch of October 10th received. Does it not look as if Hood was going to attempt the invasion of Middle Tennessee using the Mobile and Ohio and Memphis and Charleston roads to supply his base on the Tennessee River about Florence or Decatur? If he does this, he ought to be met and prevented from getting north of the Tennessee River. If you were to cut loose, I do not believe you would meet Hood's army, but would be bushwhacked by all the old men and little boys and such railroad guards as are still left at home, Hood would probably strike for Nashville, thinking that by going north he could inflict greater damage upon us than we could upon the rebels by going south. If there is any way of getting at Hood's army, I would prefer that, but I must trust to your own judgment. I find I shall not be able to send a force from here to act with you on Savannah. Your movements, therefore, will be independent of mine, at least until the fall of Richmond takes place. I am afraid, with such lines of road as he has to protect, could not prevent Hood from going north. With Wilson turned loose, with all your cavalry, you will find the rebels put much more on the defensive than heretofore. U.S. Grant, Lieutenant General, Major General W.T. Sherman. End of Section 72, Part 2 of 4. Recording by Jim Clevenger, Little Rock, Arkansas, Jim at joccleb.com. Section 72, Part 3 of 4 of Personal Memoirs of U.S. Grant. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jim Clevenger. Personal Memoirs of U.S. Grant by Ulysses S. Grant. Report of Lieutenant General U.S. Grant of the United States Armies, 1864-1865. Continued. Kingston, Georgia, October 11 a.m. Hood moved his army from Palmetto Station across by Dallas and Cedartown and is now on the Coosa River south of Rome. He threw one corps on my road at Ackworth, and I was forced to follow. I hold Atlanta with the 20th Corps and have strong detachments along my line. This reduces my active force to a comparatively small army. We cannot remain here on the defensive. With the 25,000 men and the bold cavalry he has, he can constantly break my roads. I would infinitely prefer to make a wreck of the road and of the country from Chattanooga to Atlanta, including the latter city, send back all my wounded and worthless, and with my effective army move through Georgia, smashing things to the sea. Hood may turn into Tennessee and Kentucky, but I believe he will be forced to follow me. Instead of my being on the defensive, I would be on the offensive. Instead of guessing at what he means to do, he would have to guess at my plans. The difference in war is full 25%. I can make Savannah, Charleston, or the mouth of the Chattahoochee. Answer quick, as I know we will not have the telegraph long. W.T. Sherman, Major General, Lieutenant General Grant. City Point, Virginia, October 11, 1864, 11:30 p.m. Your dispatch of today received. If you are satisfied the trip to the seacoast can be made, holding the line of the Tennessee River firmly, you may make it, destroying all the railroads south of Dalton or Chattanooga as you think best. U.S. Grant, Lieutenant General, Major General W.T. Sherman. It was the original design to hold Atlanta, and by getting through to the coast with a garrison left on the southern railroads leading east and west through Georgia, to effectually sever the east from the west. In other words, cut the would-be Confederacy in two again, as it had been cut once by our gaining possession of the Mississippi River, General Sherman's plan virtually effected this object. General Sherman commenced at once his preparations for his proposed movement, keeping his army in position in the meantime to watch Hood. Becoming satisfied that Hood had moved westward from Gadsden across Sand Mountain, General Sherman sent the 4th Corps, Major General Stanley commanding, and the 23rd Corps, Major General Schofield commanding, back to Chattanooga to report to Major General Thomas at Nashville, whom he had placed in command of all the troops of his military division, save the 4 Army Corps and cavalry division he designed to move with through Georgia. With the troops thus left at his disposal, there was little doubt that General Thomas could hold the line of the Tennessee, or, in the event Hood should force it, would be able to concentrate and beat him in battle. It was therefore readily consented to that Sherman should start for the seacoast. Having concentrated his troops at Atlanta by the 14th of November, he commenced his march, threatening both Augusta and Macon. His coming out point could not be definitely fixed.
No threat.
Having to gather his sustenance as he marched through the country, it was not impossible that a force inferior to his own might compel him to head for such point as he could reach, instead of such as he might prefer. The blindness of the enemy, however, in ignoring his movement and sending Hood's army, the only considerable force he had west of Richmond and east of the Mississippi River, northward on an offensive campaign, left the whole country open and Sherman's route to his own choice. How that campaign was conducted, how little opposition was met with, the condition of the country through which the armies passed, the capture of Fort McAllister on the Savannah River, and the occupation of Savannah on the 21st of December are all clearly set forth in General Sherman's admirable report. Soon after General Sherman commenced his march from Atlanta, 2 expeditions, one from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and one from Vicksburg, Mississippi, were started by General Canby to cut the enemy's lines of communication with Mobile and detain troops in that field. General Foster, commanding Department of the South, also sent an expedition via Broad River to destroy the railroad between Charleston and Savannah. The expedition from Vicksburg, under command of Brevet Brigadier General E.D. Osmond, Colonel, 3rd United States Colored Cavalry, captured on the 27th of November and destroyed the Mississippi Central Railroad Bridge and trestle work over Big Black River near Canton, 30 miles of the road and 2 locomotives, besides large amounts of stores. The expedition from Baton Rouge was without favorable results. The expedition from the Department of the South, under the immediate command of Brigadier General John P. Hatch, consisting of about 5,000 men of all arms, including a brigade from the Navy, proceeded up Broad River and debarked at Boyd's Neck on the 29th of November, from where it moved to strike the railroad at Grahamsville. At Honey Hill, about 3 miles from Grahamsville, the enemy was found and attacked in a strongly fortified position, which resulted, after severe fighting, in our repulse with a loss of 746 in killed, wounded, and missing. During the night, General Hatch withdrew. On the 6th of December, General Foster obtained a position covering the Charleston and Savannah Railroad between the Coosawhatchie and Tullafini Rivers. Hood, instead of following Sherman, continued his move northward, which seemed to me to be leading to his certain doom. At all events, had I had the power to command both armies, I should not have changed the orders under which he seemed to be acting. On the 26th of October, the advance of Hood's army attacked the garrison at Decatur, Alabama, but failing to carry the place, withdrew towards Cortland and succeeded, in the face of our cavalry, in effecting a lodgment on the north side of the Tennessee River near Florence. On the 28th, Forrest reached the Tennessee at Fort Hyman and captured a gunboat and 3 transports. On the 2nd of November, he planted batteries above and below Johnsonville on the opposite side of the river, isolating 3 gunboats and 8 transports. On the 4th, the enemy opened his batteries upon the place and was replied to from the gunboats and the garrison. The gunboats, becoming disabled, were set on fire, as also were the transports, to prevent their falling into the hands of the enemy. About $1.5 million worth of store and property on the levee and in storehouses was consumed by fire. On the 5th, the enemy disappeared and crossed to the north side of the Tennessee River above Johnsonville, moving towards Clifton, and subsequently joined Hood. On the night of the 5th, General Schofield, with the advance of the 23rd Corps, reached Johnsonville, but finding the enemy gone, was ordered to Pulaski and was put in command of all the troopers there, with instructions to watch the movements of Hood and retard his advance, but not to risk a general engagement until the arrival of General A.J. Smith's command from Missouri, and until General Wilson could get his cavalry remounted. On the 19th, General Hood continued his advance. General Thomas, retarding him as much as possible, fell back towards Nashville for the purpose of concentrating his command and gaining time for the arrival of reinforcements. The enemy, coming up with our main force, commanded by General Schofield at Franklin, on the 30th assaulted our works repeatedly during the afternoon until late at night, but were in every instance repulsed. His loss in this battle was 1,750 killed, 702 prisoners, and 3,800 wounded. Among his losses were 6 general officers killed, 6 wounded, and 1 captured. Our entire loss was 2,300. This was the first serious opposition the enemy met with, and I am satisfied was the fatal blow to all his expectations. During the night, General Schofield fell back towards Nashville. This left the field to the enemy, not lost by battle, but voluntarily abandoned so that General Thomas's whole force might be brought together. The enemy followed up and commenced the establishment of his line in front of Nashville on the 2nd of December. As soon as it was ascertained that Hood was crossing the Tennessee River and that Price was going out of Missouri, General Rosecrans was ordered to send to General Thomas the troops of General A.J. Smith's command and such other troops as he could spare. The advance of this reinforcement reached Nashville on the 30th of November. On the morning of the 15th December, General Thomas attacked Hood in position and in a battle lasting 2 days, defeated and drove him from the field in the utmost confusion, leaving in our hand most of his artillery and many thousand prisoners, including 4 general officers. Before the Battle of Nashville, I grew very impatient over as it appeared to me, the unnecessary delay. This impatience was increased upon learning that the enemy had sent a force of cavalry across the Cumberland into Kentucky. I feared Hood would cross his whole army and give us great trouble there. After urging upon General Thomas the necessity of immediately assuming the offensive, I started west to superintend matters there in person. Reaching Washington City, I received General Thomas's dispatch announcing his attack upon the enemy and the result as far as the battle had progressed. I was delighted. All fears and apprehensions were dispelled. I am not yet satisfied, but that General Thomas, immediately upon the appearance of Hood before Nashville, and before he had time to fortify, should have moved out with his whole force and given him battle, instead of waiting to remount his cavalry, which delayed him until the inclemency of the weather made it impracticable to attack earlier than he did. But his final defeat of Hood, so complete, that it will be accepted as a vindication of that distinguished officer's judgment. After Hood's defeat at Nashville, he retreated, closely pursued by cavalry and infantry, to the Tennessee River, being forced to abandon many pieces of artillery and most of his transportation. On the 28th of December, our advanced forces ascertained that he had made good his escape to the south side of the river. About this time, the rains, having set in heavily in Tennessee and North, making it difficult to move army transportation and artillery, General Thomas stopped the pursuit by his main force at the Tennessee River. A small force of cavalry under Colonel W.J. Palmer, 15th Pennsylvania Volunteers, continued to follow Hood for some distance, capturing considerable transportation and all the enemy's pontoon bridge. The details of these operations will be found clearly set forth in General Thomas's report. A cavalry expedition under Brevet Major General Grierson started from Memphis on the 21st of December. On the 25th, he surprised and captured Forrest's dismounted camp at Verona, Mississippi on the Mobile and Ohio Railroad, destroyed the railroad, 16 cars loaded with wagons and pontoons for Hood's army, 4,000 new English carbines, and large amounts of public stores. On the morning of the 28th, he attacked and captured a force of the enemy at Egypt and destroyed a train of 14 cars. Thence, turning to the southwest, he struck the Mississippi Central Railroad at Winona, destroyed the factories and large amounts of stores at Bankston, and the machine shops and public properties at Grenada, arriving at Vicksburg January 5th. During the operations in Middle Tennessee, the enemy, with a force under General Breckinridge, entered East Tennessee. On the 13th of November, he attacked General Gillem near Morristown, capturing his artillery and several hundred prisoners. Gillem, with what was left of his command, retreated to Knoxville. Following up his success, Breckinridge moved to near Knoxville, but withdrew on the 18th, followed by General Almond. Under the directions of General Thomas, General Stoneman concentrated the commands of Generals Burbridge and Gillem near Bean's Station to operate against Breckinridge and destroy or drive him into Virginia, destroy the salt works at Saltville, and the railroad into Virginia as far as he could go without endangering his command. On the 12th of December, he commenced his movement, capturing and dispersing the enemy's forces wherever he met them. On the 16th, he struck the enemy under Vaughn at Marion, completely routing and pursuing him to Wytheville, capturing all his artillery trains and 198 prisoners, and destroyed Wytheville with its stores and supplies and the extensive lead works near there. Returning to Marion, he met a force under Breckinridge, consisting, among other troops, of the garrison of Saltville that had started in pursuit. He at once made arrangements to attack it the next morning, but morning found Breckinridge gone. He then moved directly to Saltville and destroyed the extensive salt works at that place, a large amount of stores, and captured 8 pieces of artillery. Having thus successfully executed his instructions, he returned General Burbridge to Lexington and General Gillem to Knoxville. Wilmington, North Carolina, was the most important seacoast port left to the enemy through which to get supplies from abroad and send cotton and other products out by blockade runners, besides being a place of great strategic value. The Navy had been making strenuous exertions to seal the harbor of Wilmington, but with only partial effect. The nature of the outlet of Cape Fear River was such that it required watching for so great a distance that, without possession of the land north of New Inlet or Fort Fisher, it was impossible for the Navy to entirely close the harbor against the entrance of blockade runners. To secure the possession of this land required the cooperation of a land force, which I agreed to furnish. Immediately commenced the assemblage in Hampton Roads under Admiral D.D. Porter of the most formidable armada ever collected for concentration upon one given point. This necessarily attracted the attention of the enemy, as well as that of the loyal North, and through the imprudence of the public press, and very likely of officers of both branches of service, the exact object of the expedition became a subject of common discussion in the newspapers both north and south. The enemy, thus warned, prepared to meet it. This caused a postponement of the expedition until the latter part of November, when, being again called upon by Honorable G.V. Fox, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, I agreed to furnish the men required at once, and went myself in company with Major General Butler to Hampton Roads, where we had a conference with Admiral Porter as to the force required and the time of starting. A force of 6,500 men was regarded as sufficient. The time of starting was not definitely arranged, but it was thought all would be ready by the 6th of December, if not before. Learning on the 30th of November that Bragg had gone to Georgia, taking with him most of the forces about Wilmington, I deemed it of the utmost importance that the expedition should reach its destination before the return of Bragg, and directed General Butler to make all arrangements for the departure of Major General Weitzel, who had been designated to command the land forces, so that the Navy might not be detained one moment. On the 6th of December, the following instructions were given. City Point, Virginia, December 6, 1864. General, the first object of the expedition under General Weitzel is to close to the enemy the port of Wilmington. If successful in this, the second will be to capture Wilmington itself. There are reasonable grounds to hope for success, if advantage can be taken of the absence of the greater part of the enemy's forces now looking after Sherman in Georgia. The directions you have for the numbers and equipment of the expedition are all right, except in the unimportant matter of where they embark and the amount of entrenching tools to be taken. The object of the expedition will be gained by effecting a landing on the mainland between Fear River and the Atlantic, north of the north entrance to the river. Should such landing be effected while the enemy still holds Fort Fisher and the batteries guarding the entrance to the river, then the troops should entrench themselves and, by cooperating with the Navy, effect the reduction and capture of those places. These in our hands, the Navy could enter the harbor and the port of Wilmington would be sealed. Should Fort Fisher and the point of land on which it is built fall in the hands of troops immediately on landing, then it will be worth the attempt to capture Wilmington by a forced march and surprise. If time is consumed in gaining the first object of the expedition, the second will become a matter of after consideration. The details for execution are entrusted to you and the officer immediately in command of the troops. Should the troops under General Weitzel fail to effect a landing at or near Fort Fisher, they will be returned to the armies operating against Richmond without delay. U.S. Grant, Lieutenant General, Major General B.F. Butler. General Butler, commanding the army from which were taken for this enterprise, and the territory within which they were to operate, military courtesy required that all orders and instructions should go through him. They were so sent. General has since officially informed me that he never received the foregoing instructions, nor was he aware of their existence until he read General Butler's published official report of the Fort Fisher failure with my endorsement and papers accompanying it. I had no idea of General Butler's accompanying the expedition until the evening before it got off from Bermuda Hundred, and then did not dream but that General Weitzel had received all the instructions and would be in command. There formed the idea that General Butler was actuated by a desire to witness the effect of the explosion of the powder boat. The expedition was detained several days at Hampton Roads, awaiting the loading of the powder boat. The importance of getting the Wilmington expedition off without delay, with or without the powder boat, had been urged upon General Butler, and he advised to so notify Admiral Porter. The expedition finally got off on the 13th of December and arrived at the place of rendezvous off New Inlet near Fort Fisher on the evening of the 15th. Admiral Porter arrived on the evening of the 18th, having put in at Beaufort to get ammunition for the monitors, the sea becoming rough, making it difficult to land troops, and the supply of water and coal being about exhausted, the transport fleet put back to Beaufort to replenish. This, with the state of the weather, delayed the return to the place of rendezvous until the 24th. The powder boat was exploded on the morning of the 24th, before the return of General Butler from Beaufort, but it would seem, from the notice taken of it in the southern newspapers, that the enemy were never enlightened as to the object of the explosion until they were informed by the northern press. On the 25th, a landing was effected without opposition, and a reconnaissance under Brigadier General Curtis pushed up towards the fort. But before receiving a full report of the result of this reconnaissance, General Butler, in direct violation of the instructions given, ordered the re-embarkation of the troops and the return of the expedition. The re-embarkation was accomplished by the morning of the 27th. On the return of the expedition, officers and men, among them Brevet Major General, then Brevet Brigadier General, N.M. Curtis, First Lieutenant G.W. Ross, 117th Regiment New York Volunteers, First Lieutenant William H. Walling, and Second Lieutenant George Simpson, 142nd New York Volunteers, voluntarily reported to me that when recalled, they were nearly into the fort, and in their opinion, it could have been taken without much loss. Soon after the return of the expedition, I received a dispatch from the Secretary of the Navy and a letter from Admiral Porter informing me that the fleet was still off Fort Fisher and expressing the conviction that, under a proper leader, the place could be taken. The natural supposition with me was that when the troops abandoned the expedition, the Navy would do so also. Finding it had not, however, I answered on the 30th of December, advising Admiral Porter to hold on, and that I would send a force and make another attempt to take the place. This time, I selected Brevet Major General, now Major General, A.H. Terry, to command the expedition. The troops composing it consisted of the same that composed the former, with the addition of a small brigade numbering about 1,500 and a small siege train. The latter it was never found necessary to land. I communicated direct to the commander of the expedition the following instructions. City Point, Virginia, January 3, 1865. General, the expedition entrusted to your command has been fitted out to renew the attempt to capture Fort Fisher, North Carolina, and Wilmington, ultimately, if the fort falls. You will then proceed with as little delay as possible to the naval fleet lying off Cape Fear River and report the arrival of yourself and command to Admiral D.D. Porter, commanding Atlantic Blockading Squadron. It is exceedingly desirable that the most complete understanding should exist between yourself and the naval commander. I suggest, therefore, that you consult with Admiral Porter freely and get from him the part to be performed by each branch of the public service so that there may be unity of action. It would be well to have the whole program laid down in writing. I have served with Admiral Porter and know that you can rely on his judgment and his nerve to undertake what he proposes. I would therefore defer to him as much as is consistent with your own responsibilities. The first object to be attained is to get a firm position on the spit of land on which Fort Fisher is built, from which you can operate against that fort. You want to look to the practicability of receiving your supplies and to defending yourself against superior forces sent against you by any of the avenues left open to the enemy. If such a position can be obtained, the siege of Fort Fisher will not be abandoned until its reduction is accomplished or another plan of campaign is ordered from these headquarters. My own views are that if you effect a landing, the Navy ought to run a portion of their fleet into Cape Fear River, while the balance of it operates on the outside. Land forces cannot invest Fort Fisher or cut it off from supplies or reinforcements. The river is in possession of the enemy. A siege train will be loaded on vessels and sent to Fort Monroe in readiness to be sent to you if required. All other supplies can be drawn from Beaufort as you need them. Keep the fleet of vessels with you until your position is assured. When you find they can be spared, order them back, or such of them as you can spare, to Fort Monroe to report for orders. In case of failure to effect a landing, bring your command back to Buford and report to these headquarters for further instructions. You will not debark at Buford until so directed. General Sheridan has been ordered to send a division of troops to Baltimore and place them on sea-going vessels. These troops will be brought to Fort Monroe and kept there on the vessels until you are heard from. Should you require them, they will be sent to you. U.S. Grant, Lieutenant General, Brevet Major General A.H. Terry. Lieutenant C.B. Comstock, aide-de-camp, now Brevet Brigadier General, who accompanied the former expedition, was assigned in orders as Chief Engineer to this. It will be seen that these instructions did not differ materially from those given for the first expedition, and that in neither instance was there an order to assault Fort Fisher. This was a matter left entirely to the discretion of the commanding officer. The expedition sailed from Fort Monroe on the morning of the 6th, arriving at the rendezvous off Buford on the 8th, where, owing to the difficulties of the weather, it lay until the morning of the 12th, when it got underway and reached its destination that evening. Under cover of the fleet, the disembarkation of the troops commenced on the morning of the 13th, and by 3:00 p.m. was completed without loss. On the 14th, a reconnaissance was pushed to within 500 yards of Fort Fisher, and a small advance work taken possession of and turned into a defensive line against any attempt that might be made from the fort. This reconnaissance disclosed the fact that the front of the work had been seriously injured by the Navy fire. In the afternoon of the 15th, the fort was assaulted, and after most desperate fighting was captured, with its entire garrison and armament. Thus was secured, by the combined efforts of the Navy and Army, one of the most important successes of the war. Our loss was killed 110, wounded 536. On the 16th and the 17th, the enemy abandoned and blew up Fort Caswell and the works on Smith's Island, which were immediately occupied by us. This gave us entire control of the mouth of the Cape Fear River. At my request, Major General B.F. Butler was relieved, and Major General E.O.C. Ord assigned to the Department of Virginia and North Carolina. The defense of the line of the Tennessee, no longer requiring the force which had beaten and nearly destroyed the only army now threatening it, I determined to find other fields of operation for General Thomas's surplus troops, fields from which they would cooperate with other movements. General Thomas was therefore directed to collect all troops not essential to hold his communications at Eastport in readiness for orders. On the 7th of January, General Thomas was directed, if he was assured of the departure of Hood south from Corinth, send General Schofield with his corps east with as little delay as possible. This direction was promptly complied with, and the advance of the corps reached Washington on the 23rd of the same month, whence it was sent to Fort Fisher and New Bern.
Alright, we're going to stop right there and start another one.